My name is Mark Elliott, and back in the late 80s and early 90s, I represented IBM's relationships to all state and local governments in the United States. Because of that relationship, I made a call on the Secretary of State, Bill Graves, who introduced me to the governor, who invited me to my first hunt. And as they say, the rest is history. I've been going over 30 years, and I've traveled from and to at least three foreign countries to get to the hunt or to leave and get back to some job I had somewhere else over the course of that time. But I've been here as often as I can and made many lifelong friends. In the first 24 hours on arriving in El Dorado were incredibly memorable because I arrived and then get introduced to this young man named Ted Cox, who was Billy Cox, who'd been the game warden, his son. And we start talking about it, and he's downtrodden. He said, Mark, he said, I have been working for weeks. Dad helped me get some special property. I've scouted, I've built blinds, and the turkeys have been there. And he said, I went out there this morning just to make one last time. And he said, the farmer plowed the field in front of the blind. And he said, I don't know what it's going to be like. So I said, well, it's turkey hunting, Ted, let's go see what we got. So off we go the next morning. And sure enough, we hear the turkeys, but they don't come into the plowed field. And so we come in at noon. And again, Ted is taking this more hard than I am, more difficult than I am. We go in at noon, have a little lunch. And the man he works for was a man named Ed Markle. And Ed Markle was guiding his boss that morning, and they had gotten their turkey. And we were chatting back and forth. And Ed says, well, Ted, why don't you and Mark come back out to the area I hunt over by Pretty Prairie, and we'll see if we can get a turkey over there. So off we go. And I meet a man named Ed Markle, and as everybody else on the phone, Ed Markle and I were close friends for the rest of his life. When he died a couple of years ago, Ed Markle became a lifelong friend because of that first day at the governor's one-shot turkey hunt. Anyway, that afternoon, Ed and Ted got some turkeys talking to us. We set up, and they called for an hour. The top of Ted's mouth was raw from his reed call, and they were just hung. You could hear them. They're just over this little rise, and eventually, three matching tom turkeys walk over that rise, and I killed my first turkey. I can remember that vividly as my first day, my first 24 hours. I kill my first turkey, and I meet a man who was a lifelong friend. So that's probably the most special memory of that early memory of the turkey hunt. Anyway, one of my lifelong friends from the first day in IBM, I met a fellow named Reed Farley, and Reed has been like a brother. Within 2 years, my father thought of him that way. My brother thinks of him that way. I'm the godfather to his kids. I mean, it's that kind of relationship. So we talked regularly, at least twice a week when we weren't working together. So I show up at the hunt, and we have the opening gathering that first night. And I go back to my room, and I call Reed. I say, hey, you're not going to believe what I'm doing. The governor's one-shot turkey hunt. He said, wow. And he said, who's the governor? I said, a guy named Mike Hayden. And there's this quiet. He said, Mark, it's unlikely. Well, would you ask him if he was in Vietnam with a guy named Reed Farley? Because a key partner in part of my survival in Vietnam was this lieutenant called Mike Hayden. And I said, sure. Well, when I asked Mike almost turned white a little bit when he said, oh, I know Reed Farley. And he went on to tell me a bit of the stories. Well, subsequent to that, he invited Reed to be one of the celebrities. Word has it a turkey could have walked 4 feet in front of the blind because all he did the first morning was tell stories. They wouldn't have known if a turkey was there or not. And then in the final banquet, when Marv stood up and announced or introduced all the celebrities, he didn't introduce Reed. And I thought, oh, that's a shame. Well, there was a reason, because then Mike had asked for the opportunity, and there weren't any dry eyes in the audience, mine included, by the time he got done telling the story. So that will always be one of the highlights of the governor's hunt. When I was making a call on Bill Graves, at the time Secretary of State, I think was his title, and we were doing a project with IBM, and he said, you got a minute? And I said, sure. And he said, I understand you like to hunt. And he invited me to the hunt. I've been hunting since I was 8, but I'd never hunted turkey. So I was delighted. And so I get this thing in the mail, and I come home. I say, Jan, I've been invited to be a celebrity at the governor's one-shot turkey hunt. Well, you want to go with me? She said, I'm not sure I want to be with anybody who thinks you're a celebrity. But off we went. As far as I know, I still hold the record for the largest turkey in the hunt. A guy, Joe, up north, 2 hours north of El Dorado, it was his property, and he and Ed had been talking, and they'd been doing some scouting, and they'd seen this big bird. He had a telephoto lens. He had pictures of the spurs that he'd taken when he was out scouting. And so eventually and remembering that big boy coming in kind of behind everybody else and shooting that big turkey. And then looking, seeing Spurs was, and it was a magic moment. Another magic moment of something that I remember very special is that I got to bring my father as a celebrity one year. And I was with him when he shot his first turkey. And I remember while I've been there, when you were in shirt sleeves or, you were hot, the day he came, it was freezing cold. And I remember him shivering out there. I'm not sure I can hit this bird. I'm shaking so hard, but he did. So those are special memories when you get to have your family participate. But early on, it was obvious to me that there's a lot about youth in this turkey hunt. And I've always believed that in hunting in general is how in the world can we pass this on to next generations? And so I was introduced to the essay contest, the Young Jake contest, as they call it, for National Turkey Federation. And I agreed to sponsor, and I still sponsor the travel for that Jake to come out. So I've gotten to meet those people. When I'm there, they usually come over and we get to meet and talk to them and their parents. The future of the country's safe as long as there are enough of those kind of people around because I've met some spectacular young people. I can think of four people who have became lifelong friends. I've already talked about Ed Markle and his family, his son Daryl, Judy, and through him, a guy named Mike Pierce, who was a writer for the Wichita paper, Rod Turner, who was actually a friend of Don Duckworth. Don Duckworth was at one of the early hunts and had up for auction a day of quail hunting or a trip to quail hunt at his place in South Georgia. And I bought it, and my father and I got to go quail hunting with him, and that too became a lifelong friendship. Lifelong friendships that developed and matured and blossomed was probably one of the most special things about the hunt. That and the youth. I mean, those are the two things that touch me. And it's incredible the number of people that make this thing work. I mean, the Janets and the Beckys and the Mars and the Judys, and you just go on, the Will. And I always worry that I'll forget saying I would because the list is so long. The Raymonds, and then celebrities themselves that came back and became an integral part of it. Adrian Hansen, a guy who kind of set a tone, I thought, for the auctions early on. It was a guy named Slim Fincham. Slim won the big bird one year, and he donated on what it was a gun or what he donated something that he had just bought back to the shoot to be re-auctioned, and it got re-auctioned for years. I don't remember whether it was a black powder gun or what it was, but he set a tone, and it kind of lit a fire under at least me and I think Ed Markle and others that this is about giving, and so Slim helped set that for me and for others, I think. It's interesting somebody mentioned it. I think I've known five governors now, and two or three of them better than others. And I couldn't have told you which party they were in because when you're at the hunt, it's not about that. It was about conservation. It was about the people. It was about Butler County. It was about youth. And that always came through no matter who was there. And I know some of those governors probably hadn't turkey hunted before, but it didn't matter. That's not what this was about. So certainly I remember that. And again, it said something about the character of the people in Kansas that it wasn't about politics. It was about something bigger. It needs to be the handing off to the next generation. And so I think what's really important is that we involve youth. And so this opportunity that Mike and Becky invited me to participate in made me think about, well, what am I going to do about that? And so given the opportunity to come, I will sign up to come, but I'll try to bring the next generation, a grandson or a son, and make sure they know about it. My son and son-in-law have both met the Markles, but have never been to the hunt. But now I've got three grandsons who are all quite interested in hunting and are reaching the age where they can. And so I think that'll be important is getting the next generation excited about it. One of the things we have to work even harder on is to get the population up because it's more fun when you introduce youth and they actually get to see something and shoot at something than a hunt all day and see nothing. Although, as Mike knows, and all of us who've done it know, eventually it's not that important. Long as you're out there among them, it's a special place. So I think that the future needs to focus on that. How do we maintain this connection to youth? And I'm pleased that the NWTF still sends the Jake and the essay contest, and I'm happy to continue to participate in that.